in this very important event, UPR in-country pre-session. It's a very important session for us all, and of course, I don't need to talk much. Here, I will welcome the National Coordinator, Eradicate, UNESCO, so that he can start up with some welcome and introductory remarks. Welcome. Your Excellency, Guest of Honor, Deputy Secretary from Ministry of Constitution and Legal Affairs, General Secretary from the Tanzania Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance, Executive Director, Save the Children, or Country Director, Save the Children, representative from Legal and Human Rights Center, ambassadors from various countries who are here, UN representative, civil society representative, and the media. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, just to refresh your mind for those who have been, of course, part of the previous e-country session that was conducted like 4 years ago. Remember, we were in the same room in 2016 when we had, it was 2016, yes, we had a in-country session. It was the first in-country session all over the world for development partners, CSOs, and government to meet prior pre-sessions that are always conducted in Geneva, prior actual review of the Universal Periodic Review. And this has now become a practice, of course, to even other countries that before we wait the pre-sessions that are normally conducted jointly with UPR Info in Geneva. Now we found it's proper that we meet here within our country and relay some information related to UPR implementation and of course the upcoming review. The purpose of having the in-country pre-session is just to, first of all, give development partners and countries that are present in Tanzania of what so far has been done in relation to implementation of the previous recommendation that the government of Tanzania accepted, and also relaying some information to them on how human rights situation, of course, is faring for the last 4 years before the next review. And we did this and we continue to do this to avoid misleading of information at some point. We know that countries do ask a lot of questions during the actual review, and sometimes they are requested by their countries present in Geneva to send some information so that they can have proper questions to our government. So the aim is to have a proper forum whereby partners and countries that are present here in Tanzania or UN member state present in Tanzania can get relevant information related to UPR implementation of the previous recommendation, as well as the general situation of human rights, most importantly, thematic human rights situations, because we have more than 9 thematic areas that are going also to do some of their presentations here today. So briefly, we wanted to avoid some of the questions that are going to be asked during the actual review that are not purely reflecting, of course, what is happening in Tanzania, or sometimes they're just communicated by people who are not informed of what is happening in Tanzania. I think the representatives of civil society who are here, we've chosen a few representatives of civil society from across the country who can give you the real information, the real situation of human rights in Tanzania, and also can also ask so many questions before you maybe communicate with your member states or representatives in Geneva before the actual review that is due some few days to come. So in front of us, we'll have also the representative from Ministry of Constitutional and Legal Affairs. We know that the Ministry of Constitutional and Legal Affairs, generally, they are custodians of human rights issues and legal issues in Tanzania. And we have been working closely together with them since the first cycle, 2011, and then the second cycle, 2016. We've been together here in Tanzania, even in Geneva. Remember, we had even a side event in Geneva. And we came back, we developed the monitoring tools of the previous recommendation. I think out of 270 recommendations that were raised by states in Geneva, the government of Tanzania accepted 133. So out of those 133, now we are going to get the summary today of how many have been partially implemented, how many have been completely implemented, and how many have never been implemented. That is zero implementation. This is what we're going to tell you, but at the same time, we're also going to share with you the ongoing situation of human rights so that you can be able to relay this sort of information to your colleagues in Geneva for actual. I don't know with COVID situation if you are going to have the physical actual review this time, but I remember last time we had a lot of delegates from Tanzania, from the government, from civil society, and we met all of us in Geneva. I don't know for this time if we are going to have really an actual review in Geneva, given the COVID-19 crisis. Sometimes having actual presentation or actual review has a lot of impact because you meet with people face to face. You have side events, side meetings. People are properly informed before they go. To the actual. I remember last time we had an pre-session just 3 days before the actual review in Geneva, and it was well attended. More than 80 countries were present during the pre-session for Tanzania, and actually half of the information or recommendation from civil society were asked by states during the actual review. So this is what we also expect for this year review, that so many recommendations from us to be asked by you, of course, during the actual review in Geneva. So shortly, this is what we have. Honorable guest of honor, we have representatives from various embassies here, and which actually this is the aim of having them here, because the information we are going to share mostly will help them to communicate with their colleagues in Geneva. So I should let this house now for other people to proceed according to our timetable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, the National Coordinator of THLC, for a very good brief that you have shared with us this morning. And of course, now I will welcome the Executive Director of the Save the Children Tanzania for his few opening remarks. Welcome.
Our guest of honor, Tanzania Human Rights Defenders, Executive Director and Chairman, Executive Director and Chairman for the Legal Human Rights Center, ambassadors present here, UN representatives and development partners, CSO colleagues, media, ladies and gentlemen, habari za asubuhi. My prepared speech is a stark repetition of a lot of what the previous speaker has said. So I will actually focus on what next, and also just to give you in a minute a brief background on why Save the Children is among the distinguished organizations presenting this session to you. Save the Children, we say that human rights and especially child rights is within our DNA. And the reason we say that is because the founder of Save the Children, Eglantine Jebb, in the early 1900s, was one of the first pioneers on advocating for rights of children. And let's remember, around 1919, 1920, even women's rights were not on the agenda. A lot of human rights that we're pursuing today were not on the agenda. And she was one person that really fought for children's rights. And actually, it is believed she's the first person to even draft what later on became the UN Convention on Children's Rights. And so our very own organization was founded on the basis of child rights. And that's why we take child rights very seriously, and that's why we continue in every country, every context that we operate in. We ensure that we are on the table working with civil society on human rights, and especially child rights. Save the Children understands that violation of human rights has a significant impact on children. Hence, their rights remain a key area of our focus and interventions both at global, national, and at grassroots level. Thus, our support to the UPR mechanism as an accountability mechanism is vital, and it goes beyond our organization, involving establishment of spaces for other civil society to actively be a part of. In Tanzania, Save the Children partners with Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition, the Legal and Human Rights Center, to create a platform where a large number of CSOs engage in the UPR process and review human rights issues identified, including child rights. We also go further to ensure that voices of right holders are being heard and valued as part of the process. And therefore, we carry out quite a lot of consultations, including consultations with children as we go through this UPR process. As part of Save the Children's involvement, we inspire for the following: to have a wider civil society whose ability to engage in all stages of the UPR at country level has been strengthened and can occupy regional and global spaces for advocacy on human rights issues. Also, to capacitate civil society on monitoring and implementation of the recommendations concerning issues raised in the country, and with the aim that civil societies will be able to engage collaboratively to address these issues together with government, civil societies, development partners, and all other players, in the end to ensure that we have improved human rights practices in the country and improved human rights for all. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good session today. And this is an open space for free, and we hope that the results from this will be a precursor to the final presentation of the UPR. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Executive Director, Save the Children in Tanzania. May I take this opportunity to welcome a representative of Executive Director, the Legal and Human Rights Center, Raymond Kanegene. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Honorable Guest of Honor, Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Minister of Constitution and Legal Affairs, Executive Secretary of Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance, Mr. Nabo Say, but also Country Director of Save the Children, National Coordinator of Eradicate, ambassadors, UN representatives, and invited guests. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah. Many have been told by my senior, but briefly, I would like to say that LHRC is very happy for this meeting, but also to see you here today, because as most of you understand that this process was coordinated by LHRC, THRPC, and Save the Children. So we are happy to see that this process is in this stage now, because at the time we started the process, we are not sure if the process will be smooth as what we thought. But we are now very happy to see that the process is very smooth. And also, I would like to show my appreciation to the government, because this process was very much consultative, because we engaged the Ministry of Constitution and Legal Affairs, but also the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance. They provided, or they give us their support to us. So without their their support, this process could not be easy as what now we have. And I'm sure that, today's presentation, with those recommendations which will be presented by thematic leaders, will be lifted or elevated to the Geneva session for the actual review. But also, we understand that, if I'm not sure, it will be tomorrow or 7th of October, we will be going to the pre-sessions. We'll start the pre-sessions, the in-country, not in-country pre-sessions, but the out-country pre-sessions, to which I know that THRBC will participate, LHRC will also participate, and I don't know if it's Pingo or otherwise. Pingos? Yes. So we are sure that once we participate in those out-country pre-sessions, everything could be well, because our ambitions, our expectations is to see those proposed recommendations will be taken during the actual review, because we see that those recommended issues are very pertinent, but also they are needed to be included in the government next plans. But also, it is likely to have the government representatives here. I'm sure that they will hear our call, but also they will appreciate those proposed recommendations. We have many issues we proposed. You know, we have women's issues, but children issues, but also we propose the better issues like improvement of criminal justice system and other issues. So I'm very happy again, as what I have said, but also I wish you very luck, but also a fruitful meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Raymond Kamigene from the Legal and Human Rights Center. Honorable guests, may I take this opportunity? I'm told that we have some coffee. Please feel free to join and take a cup of coffee, and as we continue with our meeting. Now, may I take this opportunity to welcome the General Secretary of the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance, Nabo Asay, for opening remarks. Welcome.
Honorable Amon Pandu, Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Constitution and Legal Affairs, Excellencies, Ambassadors here present, representatives of the development partners and international organizations, representatives of the government ministries, my brothers at the high table from the Save the Children, Legal Rights Center, Advocacy, representatives from NGOs, CSOs here present, my friends from the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and assalamu alaikum. I am very pleased today to be in front of you. But before I continue, I must take this opportunity to thank God Almighty for allowing us to be here this morning in this important meeting to discuss and ponder issues pertaining to our people and Tanzania, our home at large. I must say that to be called a general secretary is a very big title. It's a very big title. But to be sincere to myself and to do myself right, I am the acting executive secretary of the commission. And if everything goes well, then I'll be confirmed by the government, or whoever comes and then we'll continue. But this is how we do work in the government system. I thought it wise to make it clear so that when our friends from the media, when they take it, so they take it with caution. This is Nabo, and this is the acting or the executive secretary of the commission. And today I'm standing here on behalf of the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance, and my chair, retired Judge Honorable Matthew Mwaimu, really wanted to be part of this meeting, but because of reasons beyond his control, he could not make it. And that being the case, he allowed me to come and represent him and the commission large, because we know this is one of the very, very important sessions that all of us as stakeholders need to engage and need to see what is best for our country. I think, though this is not the right forum, but if I don't say it, then it's not going to be a good thing altogether. So please allow me to say a little about the Commission. It is a national human rights institution, the focal person, the focal entity in the country that is constitutionally created to promote and protect human rights in the country. In doing so, there are a lot of activities that we do to foster the promotion and the protection of human rights in our country. And we do that in line with the Paris Principle that in one way or another made possible the Commission to be in existence. And it is through the Paris Principle and the law that establishes the Commission that we get the power to work with the CSOs, to work with the NGOs and other international and national entities that are working in the human rights and good governance field. And that's why we take this meeting to be very important for us, because it's going to be sort of a bridge to discuss and deliberate on issues pertaining to human rights and pertaining to UPR and the welfare of our country. So on behalf of the Commission, I'm taking this opportunity again to thank Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition, the Legal Human Rights Center, and the Save the Children for making this meeting a reality. UPR in-country representation is an important for us as an opportunity as stakeholders, since it's a platform to lobby on one side and discuss on the implementation of the second cycle UPR recommendations accepted by our country. On the other side, as a country, during the last cycle, we received 227 recommendations, and 133 among them were accepted, while the remaining were noted. It is important to note that human rights is always evolving. There are a lot of issues that we call them universal and all we can mention. But again, the yardstick or the corner of it, as far as Tanzania and the people in Tanzania are concerned, are the issues of our norms, traditions, culture and our identity. So UPR is very important, and whatever we're going to discuss here will be fitting to our context if we be gauged in those parameters I've just mentioned for the purpose of reflection. And it is my humble opinion that while liberating these issues, we should always consider the parameters or the guidelines that guide us as a nation. As I've said about the Commission, our role and our mandate is geared in the promotion and protection of human rights and good governance in Tanzania, and its roots are in the Constitution, and in our law, Cap 391, and reflections from the Paris Principle of 1993. That being the case then, SHRAG will always continue to work with the government and all the relevant human rights stakeholders in order to make sure that the rights of all Tanzanians are promoted and protected in accordance with the national values. As we are heading to the third UPR cycle in Geneva, I believe that this session comes or has come at the right time, and I urge all of us here to maximize utility, to maximize this opportunity or this platform for the well-being of our people. I wish you all good and fruitful deliberations for the development of our nation. Asante sana. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nabwase, for your well-organized summary for our meeting today, and of course the relevancy of this meeting towards the implementation of the Universal Periodic Review recommendations. Thank you so much. Now, before I welcome the guest of honor, may I take this opportunity to ask Your Excellency Ambassadors if you have any word to say.
I can say
that. We're glad. Thank you so much. Morning.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
As you may have been able to see from the faces of my Belgian friend and myself, this is something that's a bit new to us, but I'm happy to freestyle a little morning comment. Thank you for inviting us today. This is an extremely important moment for Tanzania and for every country. Good morning to the high table of brothers. We know, luckily, those of us that work in this field in Tanzania, that there are very many capable sisters working with human rights as well. They are here today, and I'm sure that they'll be doing a lot of this important work also. But it's always easy to point fingers at those that are actually here, but I couldn't help myself. So maybe three quick comments. My name is Mette Dissing-Spaldet. I'm the Danish ambassador to Tanzania, but I'm also a lawyer, a human rights lawyer, an international law lawyer, and I've been in the receiving end of the Danish UPR process. So I was heading the department in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs that was trying to prepare our foreign minister to go to Geneva, and we're doing our very, very best to get Denmark to implement the very many recommendations that flew from the process. So I know very well that this is really hard. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work from you in this room, from the government, from all stakeholders, but also that is actually worthwhile. And I think it's easy and it's a catchphrase, but talking about implementing human rights as the right thing to do and the smart thing to do is sometimes something we forget. It's the right thing to do because we've committed ourselves both to the values enshrined in many papers, many conventions, many political statements that would then commit us to do so, but also because we truly believe that this is the way to go about it, and we have legal commitments, all of us, many of them. But it's also the smart thing to do, because any country that opens up its space for its people to prosper from human rights actually does. So it's not only a question of having to, of feeling a moral imperative to do so. It's also a question of allowing your own country to prosper, to have an inclusive economic development that would actually improve from opening up civic space, opening up democratic space, opening up media space, and basically taking the discussion you need to keep any country on track. So it's not just Tanzania, it's any country. My country certainly benefits from processes such as these, where you keep the government on its toes to do the right thing, the smart thing, to do what's best for everybody. So it provides the government with a bit of an adjustment when that's needed. So that's what we're doing here. So that's one thing, right and smart to do this. And the other thing is that this is a hard process, and the poor minister that will be, I don't know who will be leading Tanzania's delegation just yet, but is often a minister. He or she will be in this seat for a long time, responding to difficult questions. So we always think that when we're done, we get the recommendations, we respond to them, that's when we can then relax. But that's actually when it becomes to keep working. Because the paper tigers, they don't matter at all. So if you have a report with accepted or noted recommendations, that's all good, but it doesn't bring us anywhere. So what we really need to do is find a plan together. All stakeholders, the government, the parts of government that are engaging in this, diplomatic community, the partners in this room, anybody would then come together on a plan to then implement. And that's where it gets tough, and that's when it sometimes costs money. But can I just stress that the freedom rights don't cost money? That's a question of not doing things. So that's the easy bit, one could say. But this is what's really important. That is that we come together and we make a plan and we implement it. And of course it's on the government to lead this. But it's on all of us to help and to insist and to do our very best to make it happen. So I think that's more than enough for me. Thank you for having us, and good luck with the talk.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency Ambassador, for your remarks, and of course, hopefully in the near future we'll have more women in front here. Thank you so much. May I take this opportunity to speak just a little about the process that led to our Eradicate, so that he can give us a brief background of this BPR process, and of course welcome our guest of honor for a brief speech. You're welcome.
I think my role is just to welcome our guest of honor. Then later on, after the opening remarks, you will hear the summary of the findings, the report, and other things. So, Mr. Kanju, please, you are most welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Yes. The Executive Secretary of the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance, Executive Director of the Human Rights Defenders Coalition, my colleague Onesmo Ngulumo, Country Director of Save the Children in Tanzania, representative of Legal Human Rights Center, ambassadors, high commissioners, heads of development partners, heads of the civil society organizations, colleagues from the media, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I salute you in the name of the United Republic of Tanzania. That will be the responsible day. Na wasalimia kwa jina la Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania. I hope Excellency Ambassadors will be struggling to learn Swahili language. Swahili language is our national language, and we in the government, we are proud of using our national language, especially all the forums that are conducted here in Tanzania, as one way of promoting our own language. But there is not a national language, but it's becoming African language. So I hope the organizers of the event, maybe during the fourth cycle, will have this in-country precision in our own language. But for today, it's okay. I join you in using the international language, that is English. Am I allowed? The response is from few of you. You should not take it that because I'm wearing the earphones I cannot hear. I can hear. On behalf of the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for inviting the Minister of Constitution Affairs, that is coordinating the UPR process and the human rights, to come and be part of this important and a unique forum, which is bringing together stakeholders from the government, civil societies, development partners, and from the embassies to come and sit together in this pre-session so that we can dialogue and deliberate on our preparation towards the UPR report that is due for consideration and deliberation on 5th November 2021. So on behalf of the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, I convey our appreciation to all of you for being part of this very important event. We hope that this event is going to be a rightful forum for your preparation. And we commend this spirit of working together under one forum of the Human Rights Defenders Coalition, so that our efforts, our intervention on issues of human rights are well coordinated. And when we go to Geneva, we go as one team. But this spirit has been evidenced through the entire process. And as it has been rightly said by Onesmo Lenguruma, we have been working together since the introduction of the UPR process and throughout the preparation of the UPR process for the all cycles, of which I'm glad to inform you that the United Republic of Tanzania have been participating fully in all cycles, and they've been submitting our national reports in due time. We really appreciate the spirit of working together we have enjoyed for those meeting towards the preparation of our third national UPR reports. We enjoyed the cooperation from the civil society organization and the good coordination of the Human Rights Defenders Coalition. But also we got the cooperation from the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance, and this cooperation I'm emphasizing on, it is from both parts of the Union. And as we all could recall, after the adoption of the recommendation in September 2016, in which the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, we accepted in full 131 recommendations, and in part we accepted 2 recommendations. Right after that adoption, we came back, we disseminated the recommendations to all stakeholders, to all civil society organizations, government actors in both parts of the union, and during the implementation phase and the follow-up, we worked together. And you can all acknowledge, especially those from the civil society and from the national rights governance, that even during the preparation of the national report, this one that we have submitted on 9th August 2021, we worked together. And then we also acknowledge and appreciate the spirit of reciprocity from the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance and from the civil society. You engaged state actors in the preparation of their own reports. We encourage the government of the United Republic of Tanzania that we continue with this culture because it brings us together. We provide inputs in the reports of the government and the annual report that is submitted to the to the Human Rights Council on the rights of our people and on human rights. Dear members present here, on behalf of the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, we wish you deliberate dialogue in this in-country procession, and we hope, Excellency Ambassadors, you will be able to get the rightful information and will be able to encourage your home countries and other countries that will be able to raise their recommendation, that they give recommendations that are clear. We encourage to get the recommendation that are in conformity with our own existing Constitution of the United Republic of Tanzania, policies, laws, customs, and the values. If we'll be able to get those clear recommendations, it will be easier for us to implement them, rather than getting a number of recommendations that are contrary to our existing legal systems, that are contrary to our own values and beliefs. For sure, that I can tell it straight that we will not be able to implement those. Because as the government, we all operate within the auspices, within the parameters of our own laws. So we expect that this gathering will also inform you on things that are within the ambities of our laws, policies, and regulations. As we are preparing for the deliver consideration of our own reports, we expect that we will work together. It has been rightly said by my previous speakers that we work together during the second review, and now we work together for the third cycle that will yield the fourth cycle. And on behalf of the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, we pledge that after the adoption of the report, we will work with all of you here in the room to ensure that we'll have an effective implementation of the recommendation, effective monitoring and follow-up mechanism, so that at the end of the process, we'll be all glad that all the recommendation that will be live, that will be also clear and understandable, that will be fully implemented by all of us. As you all understand that the UPR process, looking at it, it may be seen as the state-driven already process. But on the contrary, the implementation needs our closest collaboration to be able to implement them in full. We need the cooperation and the collaboration from the civil society organization, Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance, development partners, embassies, and the state actors, because we all complement each other. Once again, in concluding, I acknowledge and appreciate the support we got from one UN system, being the East Africa Regional Office of High Commission for Human Rights, the support we got from the Office of the UN Resident Coordinator, the support we got from UNDP, UNFPA, from different embassies, civil society organizations, and those who are involved in the implementation of the UPR recommendation. We really appreciate that, and we encourage you to continue that spirit of working with us. And on a special note, the implementation of the UPR recommendation, the one we accepted in full, that 131, and the 2 accepted in part, were to a great extent supported by UNDP through the Project of Access to Justice and Human Rights. But we expect during the implementation of the 4th cycle, we get more support. And I said earlier that the implementation of all these recommendations needs all of us here in the room and those outside to be able to implement them to its finality. Having said these remarks, may I take this opportunity to declare that this forum, this very important event that is in-country pre-session, is officially open, and I wish you deliberate discussion. Thank you.
Excellency Ambassador from Denmark, you said the high table is not balanced, but it is because of sending the representatives. Maybe if at all those people who were intended to be here, like Anna Hender, maybe the high table could be well balanced. This is the problem of sending the representatives. But I know there are people like the executive director from Legal Rights Center could be here, but now he sent the representative who unfortunately appears to be a man. So it's okay, but you did not note the presence of a person with vision impairment, which is also another credit when you are discussing of human and people's rights. But it's okay.
Yes, thank you so much. May we clap again hands for the guest of honor. Thank you so much. Thank you for a very brief summary of what we did, and of course the cooperation that we got from the Ministry of Constitutional Legal Affairs and the other government departments as we developed the report, and now as we have already submitted the report to the UN Office of the High Commissioner. And now we are just waiting for the actual review sessions. Now, according to our schedule, our timetable, we are now required to go for a group photo, but I'm told that that can be done later after some presentations are done, and as we will be heading for the tea or lunch in the afternoon. Now, may I take this opportunity first to give a brief summary of what we did in this report before the presentations that will be done here by the thematic groups from the civil society organization representatives. The UPR process is a 4-year process, and it's actually a repetitive process. In 2016, Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition, together with some partnering organizations, including the Save the Children and the Legal Human Rights Center, we had some sessions regarding the UPR process. The report was submitted, and of course, after the actual review in Geneva, we came back in Tanzania, and of course we had some sessions regarding the way, the strategies that we are going to collectively implement, and of course monitor the process, how the recommendations are going to be implemented in Tanzania. And after the monitoring process that we did, we had in 2019 the UPR midterm report. The UPR midterm report was submitted to the UN, and of course it's available in the UN Office of the High Commissioner's website. The CSOs reported there for the midterm. After the midterm report that was submitted in 2019, we came back, and of course we had some meetings. The first meeting was conducted in Morogoro. That was the meeting that was, of course, organized by the Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition, the Legal and Human Rights Center, and Save the Children International in Tanzania. We were having a meeting, a refresher session for the civil society organizations. We had more than 70 organizations in Morogoro that were together and collectively made a reflection on the implementation of the UPR recommendations for the past 4 years. After the sessions, and of course the sessions that we had in Morogoro, we developed a report. Now the report was developed by CSOs, the human rights defenders, and of course the civil society organizations from across the country have 9 thematic groups. This report was developed by 9 thematic groups, representatives. May I mention just a few of them? The first group is the child rights group. The second group is the women's rights group. The third group is the people with disabilities group. The fourth is freedom of expression. And the fifth is civil society organizations and human rights defenders. Economic rights. And of course, we have the pastoralist rights group. These are some of the groups that participated in developing the report we have today. And of course, different thematic groups submitted their recommendations and of course their thematic group reports to the United Nations. After the submission, of course, as we are now aware that the government has already submitted its report, of course the government report, and of course the report is also available in the UN Office of the High Commissioner's website. It's available there. We'll share the link later for each and everyone to access it. It's there, it has been published. And we thank the government for that. Now, the CSO's report, joint report that we have, summarizes key issues that were accepted by the government in 2016, but also the issues that were implemented. The situation, of course, in a very brief summary, as you all know, that the limit of the wording that we have, the words that we have in the reports, almost about 6,000 words. That's why our report is a bit very compressed to make sure that we follow the guidelines that have been provided. Now, after the submission of our report, this is the time now for us to present the recommendations and, of course, just a little about the situation of the recommendations and how we can move forward to implement in the next 5 years or so. I therefore request the national coordinator if there's any kind of a word before we proceed with thematic groups presentation that will be coming.
I think maybe there's according to our timetable, we're supposed to have a group photo, and according to our guest of honor, he may probably leave sooner, so we probably break for a group photo, and then quickly we come back for presentations and from all the thematic areas. But I would like also to recognize the presence of Mr. Hassan from Zanzibar, the director of Zanzibar NGO Association, also the board member of the Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition. We also have a new lead, national coordinator, the Zanzibar coordinator of the Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition, the Zanzibar branch, Mr. Abdallah, is there. So at least we should speak. I think we have the role to close later on, so that to balance the issues of the parties. You know, we have this a union, a union matter. Human rights is a union matter, so we need to have both parties I feel well presented. So let's have a group photo, and also journalists need to leave. They need also to do some interviews with people on the high table, so that we can have them at least 10 minutes for interview, and then we come back for presentation. We'll make our session today as brief as we match. So at least by 12, I think we'll be done. Yeah, thank you for coming. Yeah, thank you.
So, journalists, and of course, can we join for a photo to take it outside?
Nikusaidie nilete.
Excellency ambassadors, ambassador guests, may I ask you to join the guest of honor for a group photo? Kwenye picha ya pamoja.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, my name is Lori Sandewa from Tanzania Women Lawyers Association. My presentation is going to be on the thematic group Women's Rights. And there are a number of key issues that are affecting women's rights in Tanzania, including deprivation in economic resources, education, social political rights, and this deprivation has referred to physical, sexual, and psychological violence to women and girls. And the literature has shown that in Tanzania, most of these, the root cause of this is the discrimination perpetrated by the custom, culture, traditions that place women and girls and child at a lower level of social relations. And some examples of the gender-based violence including physical violence, beating of women, punching, punishing, grabbing, mostly intimate partner violence that has occurred mostly, and according to the demographic survey from 2015-2016, 40% of women aged 14 to 59 have experienced one or more acts of physical violence since the age of 15, and 22% experienced physical violence in the past 12 months of the reporting time. Moreover, according to Tamwa newspaper analysis from January to September 2021, killing and battering of women, men and children violence has been occurred more than any other type of gender-based violence. So in Tanzania, up to today, there is no specific policy in gender-based violence against women and children. However, the government has developed the National Plan of Action of Violence Against Women and Children of 2016-2017, 2021-2022, and also GBV and violence against women is criminalized under the Penal Code, Cap 16, which criminalizes all forms of gender-based violence, including female genital mutilation. But although there is a significant decrease in the gender-based violence, but there is a variation as per region to region. For example, in Manyara, 57%, and Dodoma is 46%. And that also the judiciary has made a progress by ordering the reforming of the Law of Marriage Act of 1971 by amending the section whereby now children below the age of 18, who is 14 to 18, are not allowed to get married. And also, the customary declaration order is also needs to be amended. Now, there are specific recommendations to this women's rights. One of the recommendations is that first there should be a comprehensive GBV law and policy, that is to have a GBV law. Another recommendation is that the government should fulfill its obligation by amending the Law of Marriage Act and confirm the age of minimum to be 18 instead of 14. And also, the local customary declaration order should either amended or repealed, since it affects women when it comes to the issues of inheritance. And also, to increase funds to the police gender desk and capacitate police officers in charge of the desk to enable them to effectively address GBV. Another recommendation is that to increase budget in the national plan, in the implementation of the National Plan of Action, and also to harmonize the laws that on administration of diseased estates that address the problem of conflict of laws applicable during the administration of estates. And lastly, to continue creating awareness through media that triggers the solution to the community when it comes to gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taura. Save the Children, Child Rights. In the meantime, Shivyawata, for persons with disabilities, will be prepared.
Good morning to you all. My name is Wilbert Mchungus. I'm a child rights governance for Self-Care Children, and I'm here to present on the thematic area child rights groups. Now, first of all, we tackled the child rights is wide, but we looked at the aspects mainly on protection issues, and which looks at issues like violence against children, the issue of child labor, trafficking, and all that. But at the same time also we look at the issue of education being one of the key rights for children. And lastly, we look at the emerging issues on rights now, the issue of COVID-19, how it affects children and how prepared are we to ensure that children are safe, all of them. against COVID-19 effects on rights. And I would like appreciating the efforts being done by the government in different areas on the rights of the child, especially having in place the implementation of the NPA VAUC. We get from there that there are some concerns which still exist, but at the same time we'd like to make some statements for advocacy. Now please allow me to go directly mainly to the advocacy statements because of time. The first thing, acknowledging the VAUC, but we also we urge the government to strengthen the operationalization of the NPA VAUC, and especially on the area of budget allocations. And those budget allocations particularly to focus on the coordination and the effective engagements of the committees at different levels. They lack budget, and that's why they don't work clearly sometimes. Secondly, we look at the issue of corporal punishment as has been really quite persistent in Tanzania, and it is still practiced in schools, even at homes. So we urge also the government that to look at the abolish corporal punishment, but at the same time promote positive parenting in families and in communities. Then we look at providing adequate resources on the looking at the children in rehabilitation and those who are affected by trafficking. Budget should be in place to ensure that the rights are catered for. Fourthly, it was already mentioned, but we add that the government should speed up the process of amending the Law of Marriage Act. It's in a matter of budgets, I think, that will protect the rights of girls whose rights are being violated by being subjected to marriage at early age. And increase budget allocation, especially in education, to fill the gaps where the rights are passing through, the rights of children are passing through. And like in terms of improving the environment in buildings and infrastructures in general, and provision of the necessities in books and all that. Also, we would like also to advocate for re-entry back to school for the girls who become pregnant and get children while they are still in school. I think this is an issue we should now take up our arms as with the government to advocate strongly to ensure that these girls go back. They deserve their right for education. And affirmative action also should be done to ensure that children with disabilities work well and live well in the communities, but mainly in the learning institutions, and get all the rights like any other children who has the benefit on that. And lastly, but not least, looking at the emerging issues, we see COVID-19 has really shaken the core systems of living in Tanzania. But when we look at the children, there are some direct and indirect effects on their rights caused by COVID-19. So the question remains, are we aware and do we really pay enough attention on the rights of children concerning COVID-19? So the recommendation is that we need to have the strong data collection element on the impact of COVID-19 on the lives of children, especially their rights, directly and indirectly. And lastly, we need to reach, the government to lead, that we reach out to specific needs of all children, including children with disabilities, on their safety from COVID-19. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Save the Children. Shivyawata, you're next. Meanwhile, HelpAge will be coming next.
Morning. I'm Novatel Kwago, representing the Tanzania Federation of Disabled People's Organizations and the disability stakeholders. We had our thematic group on disability, and we looked at the implementation of UPR recommendations in two categories. The first category was about the general recommendation on legislative and administrative issues on disability rights. And first, it was recommended about the submission of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with with disabilities. It is overdue, and we expected that it should have been submitted almost 6 years back. So far, the government has worked on the state report, and we are informed we have the final draft pending the administrative protocol. So it should go through the relevant authorities before it is submitted to Geneva. And also, we have development in different legislative aspects, and we found that regarding access to justice, the government adopted the rules on access to justice, which is aimed at fast-track all cases involving persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups. But we still recommend that the government should submit the report without further delay. Another aspect, we looked at the recommendations regarding the rights of people with albinism in Tanzania, so that protective measures and other legislative measures that could foster, abolish and fight against impunities and enhance access to justice for all persons with albinism. So far, the government has launched the campaign in collaboration with stakeholders to create awareness on the rights of people with albinism. And also, we have the development, especially on the side of Zanzibar, where they have formulated the Zanzibar policy on persons with disabilities, which was adopted in 2018. Yet, we recommend the government that it should provide financial and structural support to CSOs who are promoting their awareness creation to the public on the rights of persons with disabilities. Also, we recommend that the Zanzibar National Guidelines on Infrastructure Accessibility Standards should be effectively implemented. And we recommend that even in Tanzania mainland, we should have the accessibility standards be adopted to guide the constructions of infrastructure so as to enable people with disabilities access to buildings, but in the general services in Tanzania. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Page, you're next. In the meantime, Dignity Kwanza, prepare yourself.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I am Joseph Masha, representing Helpage, but working for the Eradicate group. Maybe before I briefly introduce what I prepared, maybe I would rather give a brief of the context of the Eradicate when we talk of Eradicate in Tanzanian context. Older people, as we normally need to call it in the human rights perspective, as per 2012, they were constituting around 5.6% of the total population of Tanzania. That was around 2.5 million people. But this is a group which is, you talk of almost 40%. They are living in extreme poverty, as per TASAF research that was conducted in 2017. But around 60% of children who are living in extreme condition, because we call them most vulnerable children, are cared by older people. That is older women in particular. But around this group, as we are talking 5.6, it is only 4% of those who are with the formal social pension. At least we have now increased, after Zanzibar ratification of having a universal social coverage for older people from the age of 70 and above, we have now moved to 60%. But generally, if we just have an average, it is around 5.5% of all those they have now the formal social pension. over 50% of this population, they are living with non-communicable diseases, the NCDs. And now, talking on Tanzanian context, we have now even an extra burden where we have the issues of killings associated with the witchcraft beliefs. As for last year statistics from the police force, we had 49 people, and mostly around 60%, 78% were older women that were assassinated due to witchcraft beliefs. Now, with the UPR recommendations, we submitted majorly two. That was an legal registration, but with also the issue of implementation of the strategy that is addressing the killings of due to witchcraft allegations. Basically, the two recommendations, none of it has been implemented, but of course, there are some initiatives that is underway. We have the National Aging Policy that was endorsed in 2003, up to date, almost 18 years, it has not been registered. As a way of, but of course, there are a number of strategies we have to acknowledge and recommend. We have the Social Protection Policy of 2017. For the mainland, it is still a draft. At least for Zanzibar, they have registered it and it is being implemented. That policy acknowledged for the existence of the universal pension. We have the health policy that is under review, and of course that was the aim to mainstream yes, thank you, to acknowledge the free health medical services. It is now being implemented, at least for part of it. We have developed a strategy, the government strategy to eradicate elder killings. It was developed in 2019. It is about to be ending almost next year, but we still see there are still a lot to be done. Now, our key recommendation as of now, we have the protocol that was endorsed by the head of state in 2016 that has a lot to do with almost all the social and political, social and economics related to other people. And the rule quitting section, Article 13 of it, Article 12 and Article 8 and 9, it gives very clearly on the issues of protection of other people, and in particular the witchcraft killings. So our recommendation, our key recommendations, is the signing and the ratification of it. But the second recommendation on the legislation of policy is to have this policy finalized, the review, but also being legislated. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dignity Kwanza. Meanwhile, TPCF, prepare yourself.
Good morning. My name is Jangweri Rumundo, and I'm here on behalf of Dignity Kwanza. I want to give a background of Dignity Kwanza. Is a national organization working to safeguard and promote human dignity of refugees and stateless people and other marginalized groups through legal aid, advocacy, and community empowerment and support. I'm also representing Tereminet, a network of organizations working with refugees and migration and human rights issues. I have 5 minutes, so I'll go quickly. I'll give a quick background of human rights situation of refugees in Tanzania. First, I want to give a background that Tanzania has been hosting refugees for over 60 years, but I've noted with disappointment that refugees are not in that document that is provided, but I still appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak on behalf of refugees. And currently we have over 260 refugees in camps, but many more unrecognized refugees in different cities and towns in the country. So coming to human rights, first of all, Tanzania has ratified all key refugee conventions, global and regional, but we still have gaps in the realization of such refugee rights, and we have problems specifically in the areas of refugee self-reliance. Right to work is guaranteed by all the conventions and also domestic laws, but it's still not realized on the ground. refugee status determination takes long, leaving refugees and asylum seekers in limbo for many years, up to 3 years. There's still a mandatory encampment policy restricting refugees' freedom of movement. There are concerns over voluntariness of the ongoing returns of refugees, and also there's general shrinking asylum space, as evidenced by an admission of people seeking refuge that we have noticed from the southern borders. Also, another area that we find gaps is the domestic laws enacted lack regulations, making the implementation of such law unpredictable and inconsistent, because the procedures relies more on the wishes of the officials. So the recommendations that we are proposing are, first, to formulate refugee employment regulations and non-citizens Employment Regulations Act, to formulate regulations on 2 laws. One, the Refugee Employment the Non-Citizens Employment Regulations Act and Refugees Act. These 2 laws provide rights for refugees. The Refugees Act provides general rights, but the Non-Employment Act provides rights specific to refugees, right to work for refugees, but they lack regulations, as I mentioned before. But also another recommendation is to ensure that the National Eligibility Committee convene regularly to determine status within the time set by law. Also to adhere to the international standards of protection of refugees on issues of admission, but also on issues of refugee livelihoods and on issues of repatriation, to ensure that repatriation is voluntary and is conducted in safety and dignity. Also to guarantee refugees freedom of movement through adoption of alternative to camp policy, which will provide criteria and procedures for refugee movement, stay, and working out of camps that ensure safety and security of all concerns. I have 1 minute. I wanted to talk about stateless as a group as well. And we don't have statistics in Tanzania of stateless people, but we have situations that expose some groups, communities, and individuals to the risk of statelessness. For example, we have long-term migration, migrants, we have porous borders. We haven't had a single proof of citizenship for many years until the recent introduction of the national IDs. And all these situations create statelessness. So our recommendations are, first, states to accede to the 1951 Convention relating to the status of stateless persons and the 1961 Convention on the reduction of the statelessness, to develop and implement an efficient statistical framework for stateless persons and a dedicated statelessness determination procedure to help map and identify stateless people in the country, to expedite the immediate naturalization of the remaining Somali Bantus, the children of 1983 naturalized Rwandese refugees, and the pending 1972 Burundian refugees, because if this is not done, this may be at the risk of statelessness. Consider providing a waiver of the reduced naturalization application fee to communities at risk of becoming stateless to prevent them from falling into statelessness. Ensure that all children born in Tanzania are registered at birth by providing accessible and free birth registration. Amend the nationality law to incorporate a provision for all otherwise stateless children born in the territory and all foundlings in Tanzania to acquire Tanzanian citizenship. And lastly, to amend the nationality law on provisions that discriminate on the basis of gender to ensure women and men enjoy equal rights to confer nationality to spouses and the children where the parent is a citizen by descent. Thank you.
Thank you, Dignity Kwanza. TPCF and Pingos Forum will come next.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning once again. Morning. My name is Joseph Watsambe, working from Tanzania Pastoralist Community Forum, a non-governmental organization, Forum of Indigenous People working in Tanzania in the areas of human rights, land tenure security, access to justice, and women's rights. I am presenting this presentation on behalf of 26 registered organizations which are under our umbrella that are working for pastoralists and hunter-gatherers, people who are depending on the forest to collect fruits so that they can make their daily living. It will be based on historical marginalization, unlawful arrest, torture, and malicious prosecution, land grabbing, unlawful eviction, and non-execution of court judgment decided in the favor of pastoralists, as well as non-harmonization of scientific and traditional adaptation strategies among pastoralists in relation to the impact of climate change and climate change variability. Further highlight civic and political rights related to indigenous people, economic and cultural rights, and specific group rights such as women, children, and people living with disabilities. I have already said the methodology about who has prepared the submission that we have done to the UN in August. I will concentrate on recognition of indigenous people. All of us, we may know that Tanzania has voted on favor of the UN Declaration on the Right of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, of 2006. Up since that time to date, Tanzania did not develop a single legislative to be able to implement the contents of the declaration. And for that reason, in our submission and in our recommendation, we requested our beloved and listening government to put in place appropriate constitutional and legislative mechanism to protect and pastoralists and hunter-gatherers' rights, to reduce discrimination of all forms against these marginalized communities, which are more vulnerable than any other community because these are not mainstream. To ensure that national legislative policies fully guarantee the right of indigenous people, access to land, access to natural resources, to ensure that they are able to practice their culture without any intimidation or any threat that their culture is barbaric or is outdated. Our culture is our life, and because of that, we need it to be protected. And because our government is quite friendly to pastoral indigenous people, we are sure that they are going to receive any recommendation from our good wishers, Your Excellencies, embassies, ambassadors, and other international people. Review the current license of policy to be related to the actual practical pastoralist indigenous ways of life, which is pastoralism. We know that without doubt that pastoralism is the main way of keeping livestock here in Tanzania. We went also further to say that to stop immediately a continued eviction of indigenous people from their ancestral land for the interest of creating national park. But also, specifically, the area of Loliondo has been hectic and hitting the media all the time, being the source of human rights violation, including human rights defenders, including myself, who are working for the rights of indigenous people. Access to justice is quite limited to our people, and we ask our lovely government to be able at least to reactivate or build the system, including the land tribunal, down to the community so that these communities are able to access justice. And we went further also to say we asked the government to degazette all the land that has been taken unlawfully, including that have been made conservation, including those game control areas, because our laws does not allow it to exist in the village land. And further, we went also further to say climate change is the main threat and the high-level threat to our survival as indigenous people. We ask our government to take appropriate measures to ensure that climate change is properly addressed in the indigenous people, taking into consideration the indigenous people knowledge of adaptation and mitigation of climate change. I ask you humbly, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, to take seriously our concern, because if we talk about women vulnerability, children vulnerability, ours are more vulnerable because we don't have schools, access in our villages, and including also our women cannot access reproductive services. And because time is quite small, I think indigenous people, pastoralists, we are thinking to organize our own pre-session to be able to have more internalized our issue. However, we are together with Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. Calling Pingos Forum. Meanwhile, there's tea, there's coffee, there's juice. You can go get your tea, come back to the table while the sessions continue because we started late. Thank you.
Good morning. So my name is Eli Chansa, and I'm coming from Arusha, representing pastoralist indigenous NGOs for a coalition of 50+ institutions in the country. So I'll be taking you through an extract of our submission, whereas we are among a few institutions that with the UPR info on the 6th tomorrow, we are having a pre-session. So quickly, without wasting further time, we do understand that the situation on the ground is that pastoralists and hunter-gatherers, whom we call indigenous peoples, have been subjected to violations, abuses, and denial of human rights, including systematic land alienation. This is evictions, intimidations, and marginalization from social services, as well as lack of recognition and protection, talking of legal recognition. This is despite the fact that the United Republic of Tanzania government has enacted several laws and policies to address land rights and other human rights. Women and girls in pastoralist communities continue to face multiple discrimination as well as they are denied their rights due to overwhelming cultural bias by men and boys. They have limited economic independence or power with limited access to land and productive resources, services, and assets, and have little scope to influence decision-making at the family, village, or district level. But I'll not talk of the rule of law. Pastoralists from the Barbary community in Vilima Vitatu, Babati district, continue to be harassed and evicted in 2018 and 2019 despite their victory in the Court of Appeal in Civil Appeal number 77 of 2012. That ruled in their favor, declaring that a wildlife management area has been established without free, prior, and informed consent. We call this FPIC. And of this day, from presenting this statement, nothing has been done to return their land. But in Mabwegere Village Council, which is a pastoralist village, they filed a case, this is in Morogoro, they filed a case number 23 of 2006 at the High Court of Tanzania against 33 farmers who established farms in their territory. The village lost in the High Court, it appealed, and the Court of Appeal of Tanzania judged in favor of Mabwegere Village Council in an appeal number 53 of 2010. The court ordered restoration of boundaries, and it also ordered that the boundaries to be respected. Now, despite the winning, the state refused categorically and for very unconvincing reasons to implement the judgment of the Court of Appeal. So the Minister for Lands Affairs finally declared that the government is going to redraw the boundary of Mabwegere Village. Now, in the 2019 local government elections, the Mabwegere Village was deregistered and pastoralists lost their land. In Vomero District Council, while fully aware that there's a pending court case allotted 147 million to dig an 11 kilometers canal along the disputed area. Now, this is an intimidating deep canal while there was a court order. Now, these are just some of issues which are happening in these areas resided by indigenous peoples, but some of our recommendations being, we strongly recommend that the government ensures implementation of SDGs, especially goal number 16, that promote just, peaceful and inclusive societies, which is paramount to realization of the rights of every citizen. But number 2, to urge the government to find lasting solutions to the ongoing conflicts between investors and agro-pastoralists, pastoralists versus crop cultivators, intra-family and tribal land conflict. but we also strongly urge the governments to effectively implement the existing laws and policies that support gender equality and women's empowerment, especially with regards to participation of women in land governance and leadership. Number 4, we ask the government of United Republic of Tanzania to ensure that protected areas authorities stop expanding their areas and planting of beacons in disputed boundaries between the protected areas and the pastoralists without consultations with the communities themselves. I'm talking of pastoralists and other interested local communities. But furthermore, the government should ensure that its civil servants are in observance of the statutory laws and that they respect the rule of law, judicial decisions made by the courts. This is very crucial for sustainable development for our country. Last but not least, from the extracts, is that the government should criminalize eviction of pastoralists through legislation, and thus no eviction is conducted without statutory provisions or court decisions. Rest my case, and whoever who will be interested in this whole submission, I'll be very happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we go to the next half, I welcome questions. If there are any questions from the plenary to the people who have presented. Should we? Okay, I got a suggestion from the THRDC coordinator that we should just finish the presentations and then we'll do the questions after. All right, so the next one is THRDC. While THRDC is coming, Mr. Tanzania, prepare yourself.
Good morning. My name is Nunu. I'm from Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition, a coalition with more than 200 civil society organizations from Tanzania mainland and Tanzania and Zanzibar. I'm here to present civil society organization and the human rights defenders in Tanzania, the situation and recommendation to the UPR. I will start with the situation of civil society organization in Tanzania and the human rights defenders. First of all, Tanzania Civil Society Organization and the human rights defenders in freedom of assembly. The situation is there have been several amendments in the regulations and law governing civil society organization, which were made between 2018 and 2020, and the major one being the Non-Governmental Organization Act and regulation and the amendment and regulation of 2018 and the Written Law Miscellaneous Amendment Act of 2018 number 2 and the Written Law Miscellaneous Amendment of 2019 number 8, of which have been adversely affecting the operation of civil society organization in Tanzania, and particularly non-governmental organization and individual human rights defenders. Secondly, we'll explain the situation of ratification on treaties in which Tanzania has not ratified the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment or Punishment of 1984 up to now, and the International Convention for Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance of 2006. And we know how these two instruments are very important in the protection of human rights defenders and civil society organizations generally. Again, on constitution making process, the new constitution making process remained restored since April 2015, and the current regime declared that this process is not the list of its priorities, as it's currently focusing on economic development. And another situation on access to justice generally, the government of Tanzania in 2020 amended the Basic Rights and Enforcement of Duties Act and also the government of Tanzania withdrawing from Article 34(6) of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, of which allows individuals and non-governmental organizations with observer status to lodge its complaints to the African Courts of Human and People's Rights. And also, again, restoration access to justice and corruption. The Police Force and Auxiliary Services Act is not yet amended to see the loopholes which allow arbitrary denial to freedom of association and assembly. And we can see between 2016 and early 2020, political rallies were generally forbidden except for the few months before the election. So that is a situation. May I go to the specific recommendation now? First of all, we call the government of Tanzania to enact the law that protects human rights defenders specifically. Secondly, we call upon the government to collaborate with the civil society organization to address all provisions of laws and regulations which limit and curtail the work of civil society organization and its survival. And I'm happy that I heard from the guest of honor that she recognized the UPR not to be only the government thing, but it needs collaboration. So, dear Honorable, we call, and our other delegates, we call upon the government to address this issue. Secondly, we call upon the government to stop criminalizing work of civil society organization, because it is a very important sector in the development of the country. And we call the government to collaborate with the Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance and other stakeholders to devise effective UPR monitoring and evaluation mechanism. And again, we call the government and other stakeholders to popularize the UPR recommendation in Swahili language so as it can be understood with a lot of people and widely disseminated to encourage holistic implementation. And the government should resume the constitutional making process from where it had ended by considering the public opinion on the same. Again, we call the government to ratify the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment of 1984 and the International Convention for Protection of All Persons from enforced disappearance of 2006. Also, we call the police and the political parties. We call the government also to fund support of legal aid services provided. And again, we call the government to make reform on public interest instigation, especially on the law I mentioned, and to reload its declaration on the African Charter to allow individual and non-government organizations to lodge complaints at the African courts. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Ms. Satan, you're next. Inua Hakielimu, prepare yourselves.
Hello everyone. My name is Neema James Kasawiro and I'm working with Mr. Tanzania, which is a non-governmental organization that promotes freedom of expression, media freedom, and access to information in Tanzania. I'm here to represent the thematic group of freedom of expression and information. And according to observations from the previous recommendations that have been made on the UPR recommendation from the 2016 report, observation shows that there are some recommendations that require the government to work on, and I'll list them and explain a bit on the recommendations. There are some recommendations to the government to investigate promptly on all attacks against journalists, also ensure adequate redress for the victims, and address concern related to claims of interference with freedom of expression. This is due to the fact that we are increased incidences of violations against journalists in the country, and not only to journalists but also to other media-related personnel in the country. And due to the observations conducted by TOCOs and analysis of the implementation shows that Tanzania has taken some legislative measures through enactment of media laws, including the Media Service Act of 2016, the Access to Information Act of 2016, and the Electronic and Postal Communication Online Content Regulation of 2020, the Statistics Act of 2015, which was also amended in 2018. Such changes are aimed at, among other things, promoting professionalism in media industries. Another observation was that despite having working operational and legal frameworks which signify exercise of freedom of expression and media, there are incidences which portray the contrary on what is being portrayed in the country. And the following are indicators which shows that despite there are these initiatives trying to create a better environment in the country on the media industries, but there are some setbacks that indicate the opposite of what is being portrayed. And one of the indicators is freedom of expression violations. Organizations like Mr. Tan and MCT have been monitoring and recording incidences of freedom of expression violations in the country, whereas there have been incidences of threats, arrest by law enforcers, confiscation of equipment, and kidnapping and missing individuals in the country. According to the Media Council of Tanzania, MCT's Press Freedom Violation Register shows that between 2018 and 2019, a total of 159 incidents of violations targeted journalists were recorded. Another indicator shows that there is denial or delayed access to public interest information held by public officers and ministries. Findings of access to information survey conducted by Visa Tanzania shows that only 30% of selected public officers and ministries had timely responded to the information inquired to the ministries, but the remaining 70 shows that sometimes no responses were given or late responses to the requested information. Going to the COCO's specific recommendation of freedom of expression information, the first recommendation is amendment of legal provisions which limit freedom of expression and information in the country. The second recommendation is law enforcement machineries should thoroughly investigate on the case of Azori Gwanda, unban newspapers, implement courts' decisions, and ensure sufficient press freedom to all media houses. This has been a challenge in the country as there have been some court orders made that the government should follow, but the response hasn't been positive from their side, like they don't implement what the court orders. Another recommendation is prioritize the Access to Information Act of 2016 over other legislation in situations where laws conflict. Also, this law should be amended to allow other appeal against the decision of the minister responsible for legal affairs. Additionally, a provision of data privacy should be considered. Another recommendation is ensure public officers, authorities, and ministries abide to Access to Information Act by promptly responding to public information requests within the legally stipulated 21 days time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Tan. Haki Elimu, you're up. Meanwhile, Haki Madini, prepare yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elisante Gideon Kitulo. I'm from Haki Elimu. So Haki Elimu, we are a non-government organization, local one, and we are advocating for equitable access to quality education for children in Tanzania. And And so I'm here to represent social right thematic group, but specifically I'll be focusing on the right to education. And so from the 2016 UPR recommendations, many of them under the education were focusing on urging the government to put in place policies and mechanisms to ensure equitable access to quality education, including access to education for children with disabilities. And so from our analysis, we feel that these recommendations have been implemented partially, because we've seen the government has come up with what is known as the fee-free education policy, which started to be implemented in 2015. And this has resulted in an increase in enrollment for children in schools for both pre-primary, primary, and secondary school. So this is one of the strategies the government has put in place to ensure that children have access to education. We also noticed that the government has a national strategy for inclusive education, which started to be implemented in 2017, and it's ending this year, 2021. And this strategy is actually aiming at ensuring that all children, including children with disabilities, have access to education. We also have the Zanzibar Development Vision 2016, which has a disability aspect and which seeks also to improve learning environment for all. So these strategies have come with some challenges. Yeah, we've noticed that there's many children now enrolled in schools, and this has actually translated into challenges. Now schools fall short of desks, classrooms, and other learning materials, which we think they can impact the quality of education that is provided in schools. Yeah, but again, when it comes to the access to education for children with disabilities, statistics still show that there's a lot of children with disabilities who are still outside the schools. So we feel that we need to have more strategies and plans to make sure that children with disabilities are also included. Another area is the girls' education. Yeah. The government has come up with plans, like the SIP, where girls are now given the opportunity, especially adolescent mothers, to go back to school through alternative pathways. Yeah, this is a step towards ensuring inclusivity. And now adolescent mothers have the option to go back to access education in an informal setting through the alternative pathways. So our recommendation: we want the government to commit to increase the budget allocation in the education sector. At least it has to reach 20% of the national budget. This is according to the international required standards. Again, I said the fee-free policy is being implemented, but it doesn't cover the alternative pathway. Yeah, so the alternative pathway comes with cost. So once the fee-free education policy to also include this alternative pathway, so that adolescent mothers can go back to school without any extra cost. And we think that it's the right time now the government to review and implement the re-entry guidelines. Yeah. So as much as adolescent mothers are given the opportunity to go through informal education through the alternative pathways, but we feel that they should also be given a chance to go back to the formal education system. So we want the government to open up the discussions about the re-entry guidelines and review the re-entry guidelines so that the adolescent mothers can go back to the formal education system without discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you, Aki Elim. Aki Madini, you are. Meanwhile, LHRC prepares of.
Good morning, everyone. I am Eric Longo from Hakimadini, but I'm representing Community Rights Group. Ours is about issues which are pertaining to economic rights. And we started by looking at land as a major source of resource, having in mind that the government has made a remarkable progress in terms of reviewing land policy and legal framework. For instance, we saw that there's a draft national land policy of national land policy, which was released in 2018. There was a move in 2014 to constitutionalize land use through the draft national constitution, which actually it ended without, and we're not sure if it will continue. But also, there are also several land titling exercises in the country, for instance, in Malini, Ulanga, and Gambero. But apart from all these initiatives, positive initiatives by the government, we still have some recommendations, such as the promoting land tenure policy that strengthens land use rights with minimal disruption to women and the landless poor. Also, promote improved legislation and the formalization of land rights through testing. Also, promote certificate for customer rights of occupancy, CCRO. Apart from land issues, we also looked at issues of climate change, looking at the government of Tanzania having taken several policy initiatives to address issues of climate change. The government of Tanzania has also done the following to implement the recommendation. For instance, we had Tanzania is a party to the Paris Agreement, which was signed in April 22nd, 2016. The government also has national guidelines for climate smart agriculture. This was 2017. And some other issues which Tanzania as a government has tried to take into account so as to make sure that issues of climate change are also carried over. But despite these achievements, still Tanzania is yet to domesticate the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Therefore, we don't have a specific law which deals with the climate change issues. Instead, Tanzania is using its environmental laws, which did not capture well climate change issues in detail. However, another challenge is that there is no harmonization of scientific and traditional adaptation strategies to the adverse impacts of climate change and the variability. For instance, in pastoral communities, they had various traditional ways of coping with these adverse impacts of climate change and the variability, which were used by pastoralists for centuries. Our recommendation of this is the government to domesticate UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Thank you.
Thank you. LHRC, Meanwhile, ZLSC.
Thank you. I'm representing the human rights and the political rights, so I'll be very brief to the point. Since it's a general human rights, so I'll also provide a general situation of previous recommendations in brief. In the last review of 2016, a total of 133 recommendations were accepted by the government of the United Republic of Tanzania. 67% of the accepted recommendations have been partially implemented, which relate to women's and child rights protection, social, political, and economic rights, as well as civil and human rights defenders. Additional 7% of the accepted recommendations have been fully implemented, most of them focusing on combating corruption and the protection of children with albinism. So it's congratulations to the government for that. But also 4% of the accepted recommendations have not been implemented at all, while 22% of recommendations we did not be able to get the implementation status. Now, specific to our recommendations, first, on the National Human Rights Action Plan, the government should update the new National Human Rights Plan of Action, because we understand that we do not have that one. Okay? Number two, on death penalty, we know there are positive political statements from the late President John Magufuli not to sign for execution of death penalty on all conflicts punishable by death penalty. But we know that we still retain in our laws the death penalty sentence. So we call for the government to amend that law, but also to ratify the Convention Against Torture, but also to ratify the second optional protocol to ICCPR, International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. It also forbids that death penalty. So we call for the government to do that. Number three, it's our call to ratify the African Charter on Democracy, Election, and Good Governance. Why? Because we are sure that once the government will ratify this, we'll join the African Union initiative to promote the universal values and the principles of democracy, good governance, human rights, and the right to development. Number four, this is on the access to justice. We call for the government to allocate funds to support legal aid services providers who are working in the hard-reach areas. So, number five, it's our call to government again to abolish corporal punishment in schools and amend these child laws for the mainland Tanzania, but also to still update the aspect of positive parenting. It's like to emphasize on the positive parenting than having that corporal punishment. So it's our call. But also in another recommendation is on the improvement in access to justice in rural areas, but also specifically here, I'll emphasize on the juvenile justice. Why? Because these recommendations in our analysis, we observe that has been partially implemented, but we still have reported instances of juvenile offenders. Juvenile offenders are putting on the same custody or on the same remand or jail with the adult offenders. So this is not good. But also in criminal justice in general, we also our call to government to make necessary legal reforms to number one, to make all offences bailable, but strategically they can start by granting powers to court to determine the application of grant of bail to even unbailable offences. So it's our another recommendation. Okay, I think this is the last. Thank you so much.
Thank you, HRC. And to finally, the LSC.
Habari za asubuhi. My name is Abdullah Juma from Zanzibar Legal Service Center, ZLSC. Zanzibar Legal Service Center is working in Zanzibar, both in Unguja and Pemba. Our main beneficiaries is women, children, and people with disabilities. And we are dealing in human rights in general. So what I can present is already presented by other groups, people with disabilities, children, and human rights in general. But actually, I took some recommendation. One among them is to which recommendation create and maintain a safe and honorable environment where citizens can exercise their rights. Here we observe that ongoing, there is act which is hinder the implementation and safe environment of CSOs in their working. For instance, there is a Business Entity Act number 2 of 2012, which is there is a challenge on that act that want all NGOs to be registered online. And we found that challenge of operating environment, especially in relation to complicity of requirement and arbitrary orders. Online registration, which is very complicated to NGOs in Zanzibar. There is among 3,500 NGOs, but only 36 NGOs which are registered online and unable to work there as only 36 NGOs which is unable to register online. Here we recommend that government should cooperate with CSO's platform to address all provisions of laws and regulations which limit to hinder the work and survival of CSOs. And another recommendation is abolishment of corporal punishment in laws. Here we observe that there is corporal punishment is still used in schools, and we recommended that corporal punishment should abolish in laws and not in oral as in speeches. For instance, there is section 47, sub 2 in Children's Act, Zanzibar law, that is clearly clarified that corporal punishment should not be used to those children who are found guilty, and that we say children conflict with law. They should be not punished by corporal punishment. So such a section should be stipulated in Education Act so that we can end up with corporal punishment in Zanzibar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now going to the plenary, where there's any questions, comments. I welcome questions and comments. My colleague Leopold will be looking at the hands, so he'll be bringing the microphone to those raising their hands.
Thank you. Anyone to comment?
Thank you. Since there was no one decided to volunteer, my question is rather a request for clarity on the basic statistics of the recommendations. How many have been accepted? Of which, how many have been implemented? How many have been noted in the sense of maybe being not accepted? And what is the rest, and how is the general status of progress as we are heading towards November 5th? Thank you.
So we'll take 5 questions, and then the people responsible will respond, and then we'll take more questions, and we'll be going that way. So, another question?
Comments? Recommendations? Any question? Welcome.
Thank you. I just have a question. If you could tell us, you mentioned that the external or the out-of-country sessions were going to start. Could you just give us a little description on what that plan is, please?
Thank you. Any other question? I'm told that we are receiving 5 questions or recommendations. Oh, welcome.
I'm no longer guest of honor, I'm part of the process. I hope you, Mr. Onesmo Nkrumah, will give credit of those 2 issues raised, especially the area of the percentage and the recommendations, but also the next pre-session external. My comments is on few things that need to be considered, and I'm talking as Harmony Punch, not guest of honor. First of all, we need to appreciate that the issue of human rights goes with responsibilities. You cannot claim human rights. And the good thing, my background and almost half of my life has been in the civil society, is until we appreciate the 2 sides of the coin is when we can be telling the truth. That you cannot talk of human rights without responsibilities. Your rights ends where someone else's rights start. Those are limits and boundaries on issues of human rights. And we need to appreciate that issues of human rights and the responsibilities need to be governed by rules, procedures, laws, policies, and the Constitution in any given land, in any given country. I hope Excellencies, Ambassadors, and High Commissioners can witness that from their respective countries. It is until you have those rules, procedures, policies, and laws you can talk of human rights and responsibilities, and these need to be adhered to by all. It is not for the government being demanded to do this, and then you avoid your own responsibilities. It is a two-way traffic. We need to observe from the government, also we need to observe from the civil society, from our own citizens. They need to observe certain things. They need to be responsible for certain things. Is when you can be balancing the two. For instance, there is issue of climate change and the existing legislation on issue of environment. It is true we have a piece of law on the issues of environment and the regulations, but yet we have other pieces of laws that are protecting the environment. And it's worth to note that Tanzania is having 30% of its land is a reserve area. That need to be appreciated as the way of protecting our own environment. We have national conservations, we have national parks. These are all aiming at protecting the environment. And the environment is not only about human beings. It's about water sources, it's about wild animals, it's about forests, including human beings as part of the environment. So these, I think, need to be well understood when we are raising issues. That it's not about just pieces and elements of the environment, no. It's the whole approach. And I think we can acknowledge that we have different pieces of laws on wildlife conservation, forest protection, and all those things. And when you do that,
it has to be in line with your population. For instance, we can talk of the issues of some national parks and national conservation that have been demarcated. And here to find we have our own people, the indigenous, living in those areas, but their population is growing rapidly, challenging the existing national conservation. But as the government of the United Republic of Tanzania, we have taken tremendous steps to remove 975 villages from the existing national parks and national conservation be used by our own people. But the challenges comes, okay? We have changed the demarcation of those areas, yet our people still go inside of those remaining areas. So it remains a challenge. That's why I said we need all of us to come together as the citizens, the government, to observe what are the boundaries and what are the limits, because we need also to protect for the future generation. I acknowledge and accept for issues of ratification and accession of the protocols. But my advice to you, really we are taking steps to ratify those instruments. It's not all about ratification. Because we know there are procedures of ratification. Maybe you can come up with a recommendation that we ratify without any reservation. Because we know there are procedures of ratifying with reservation, and they are allowed by the existing instruments. The issue of human rights action plan is true, we have it, but we have not publicly launched it because we are waiting until we finish this third cycle. We anticipated that the recommendation from the next cycle may really need us to change the existing national human rights action plan. And the issues of the adolescent girls getting to school is true. But I think we are forgetting that our existing education system allows all people to officially access the education. Looking at our own education policy of 2014 and the existing systems of education which are official, we have qualifying tests, private sitting, we have adult education, we have all these allows our people to continue their education, and they are all official. And what I wanted it to be clear, the moment the government will announce that now it is officially the adolescents, girls who are being stopped from going to school because of pregnancy, they can join. I'm telling you the reality is that all girls are likely to be vulnerable of pregnancy. So we are caught in between protecting those in school and then protecting the rights of those adolescent girls. I was talking to Mr. Onesmo in Bloom that we have relatives who are making it in different schools. We ship them from here, they go somewhere, we have their professors and others are ministers. But the moment you declare to public, you are now infringing the rights of those who are continuing their education, because they receive now the system allows us to do whatever we want. So as the government will strike the balance between those in school and those who have dropped from schools by ensuring we have alternative means that will enable them to continue their careers. So I think we need to understand the environment in which we are operating. We need to ensure that we protect the one in the system and those out of the system, so that all of them benefit from the government policies, government interventions. These are my simple interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bandu, for your fruitful interventions. And now there are two questions that have been raised. The first one about statistics. Of course, we have the current, first of all, talking about recommendations that were raised by the state during the second review were 227. And then when talking about noted and accepted, noted are those recommendations that the government of Tanzania, of course, it's a language that we don't say rejected, we use noted. Instead of using rejected, we say noted. So out of 227, Now we have 131 recommendations that were accepted instantly. That means now we have 133. That means out of those not the recommendation, other 2 recommendations were later on uplifted into accepted recommendation. So sometimes when the government receives recommendations in Geneva, they receive sometimes there are those recommendations that are rejected instantly, but those that are taken for further deliberation. That's why the government are sometimes given some months ahead to provide the final list of accepted recommendations. That means on the first instance they note all the recommendations, but when they come back home for consultation, now they provide the final list of the accepted recommendations. So we have 133 accepted recommendations, and out of those now, the implementation starts according to our own observation as civil society. We found that there's 3 category status, that is fully implemented, partial, and complete. At least 89% of some of the recommendations have been partially implemented. And then 7% have been fully implemented, and then 4% have never been touched. In the areas upon which all these recommendations were focusing on: women's rights, freedom of expression, child rights, social rights, economic rights, civil society and human rights defenders, general human rights and political rights, minority rights, at least those 8 thematic areas. If you look at those 133 recommendations, they focus around those 8 thematic areas. Now about the pre-session that is going to be taking place virtually tomorrow. That is, you know, the UPR Info is an international organization that deals specifically with UPR. And it has been in practice. In every UPR session, we conduct pre-sessions before the actual review. Actually now, maybe because of COVID or whatever, we're going to do it tomorrow, but virtually, so through online mechanisms. It's a platform that also invites international communities and states so that they can hear from the respective countries. They can actually collect recommendations so that when they go to the actual review now, at least they have information from the horses, you know, the horse of the mouth, or the mouth of the horse, at least, because some of the countries are based in Geneva, they don't have even representatives in Tanzania. So for them to get clear information, the clear picture of what is happening in Tanzania, they need to attend those pre-sessions. That's why we have that pre-session tomorrow, and we believe that it will be well attended as it used to be when we are doing it physically in Geneva. So that's the essence of having the pre-session. And then of course the bad thing with it is that it was like you have to register it before for you to attend it. So there was a link that was actually going around that will register for you to be able to participate. So I think for tomorrow, the meeting is for only those who have been registered or accredited before. So that's a very sad part of it. So but at least for those who are here, at least you have all the information that you can have at least. I know sometimes some states or countries used to relay information to your colleagues, counterparts, of course in Geneva, for them to be able to raise relevant questions during the actual review. And we are going to have the actual review next month for Tanzania. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we are done.
Thank you for good answers. Well, may I ask whether you are satisfied with the answers? Thank you. Any other recommendation, question? I'm told that may I now welcome Mzee Hassan from Angoza for closing remarks. I'm told that we can finally end this session. It was meant to be a very brief session, and we thank all Your Excellencies for attending this vital session. Thank all invited guests for joining us today in this session. Hopefully in the future we'll continue to share any kind of relevant information to the UPR review and of course the implementation of the next recommendations. May I take this opportunity to welcome Mzee Musa Hassan Kamangoza for closing remarks. Welcome.
On behalf of Tanzanian Human Rights Defenders Coalition, I would like to thank you all for participating in this important session. And everybody was free to participate or ask any question. And I would like also to thank those nine presentations, brief and there was very clear presentation. And after those few remarks, after this session, as it has been said by the national coordinator, that tomorrow we'll be having another external session. I think those who participate in these sessions will also participate in that important session. So after a few remarks, I've said that this case, I would like to thank you again, and I say that this session is closed. Thank you very much.
There will be lunch at 12:30. So I